I know that thing. So we're live. I got the recording going. I'm trying to find our trying to find my damn spreadsheet about this and what we're supposed to do here. And my browser doesn't even know that I used to have this tab open. Did I like forget how to spell noise? So like Open Coffee, John is on my case when I talk about. Oh, I see. Because
are you in the wrong profile?
Maybe. and if maybe means yes. Oh, there we go. Let's just get this thing over to this workspace. I call it noise machine, right? Our spreadsheet here for this is called noise machine for our little noise making thing. And John's like, well, you can't just make noise. And I'm like, I understand that, but projects got to have a code name, right?
Sure.
And I can't spell like glockenspiel, which is basically a noise machine, but I can spell noise machine most of the time. And that's sort of like really, I feel like all of the internet marketing stuff is really just noise machine. Sure. I'm on YouTube making noise about myself. I'm on my blog. I'm on my Blue Sky. I'm on my Threads. I don't even know why I'm on Threads. Ain't fucking nobody on Threads. I'm on Mastodon, which is also, Mastodon was getting pretty uptick. And then the Blue Sky kind of just crushed it. And I used to be on Twitter, but, even with trying very diligently to get my Twitter to be just about stuff that I care about, algorithmic changes on Twitter have turned it into being something that's like less awesome, I think, than it used to be. So we got a whole bunch of stuff on there. I was on the internet today too, and somebody was talking to me about prototyping stuff. Oh, and then this one we had scheduled for today was to talk about the word I wrote in there is recrepo, which is my Latin keyword for my vendor all the things. Do you ever use, and so maybe that's what we should hit it with today.
Sure.
And then somebody on the internet was talking to me recently about prototyping stuff. And it was like, what do you do for prototyping and like getting your MVP and everything going? And I'm like, oh, so for the website, I throw up like 3 PHP scripts to drive the website. My homepage, my contact page, and then the like noise machine page about my different socials and maybe my FAQs and that kind of crap. And then I work on my MVP, which is most of the time a very simple thing that turns into like Wizard of Oz. So that was on the list. Building an audience. N8N is still one I would like to get to covering. And then all of those different desktop containers. I mean, shit, we got that thing listed in here 3 times. Maybe it's 2 times. Desktop containers and Linux Server IO. Who, man, I can't say enough good stuff about that thing, man. But we'll come back to that. So I forget, in your day job, are you writing code?
Right now,
I don't maintaining other people's code.
This is my day job, so I don't
do anything. I meant, but when you had a day job, right? Like when you're engaged in something, is that like a coding job, or is that are you an SDE or are you an SRE? If you had to pick one of those buckets to put yourself,
it would certainly be closer to SRE. I mean, a lot of what I do is that combination, and one of the arguments I've always had against the labeling that we've applied, that when we start trying to talk about it, people are like, well, I don't want to know anything about the code. I only want to know about the infrastructure. And it's like, you can't run the system without knowing what the code is, And so
you can't run the code without knowing what the system is, is the other side of that one, flipping heck, yesterday or the day before, right? You're familiar with Go.
Yep.
So Go is like this, it gives you this compile once, run anywhere kind of hand wavy magic sauce, right? And I'm sure you've seen that. And that's mostly true when what you have is like a pure Go.
Yeah.
And then so these guys delivered this binary to us. I mean, we were paying for the code and everything like this, but they're like, here's the latest fresh bits of this binary. We're still doing some cleanup on the repo, blah, blah, blah. We can see it, but here's some bits that they gave us, and the team over here doesn't have a fresh Golang environment because they're running on some. This group still has some Debian 10.
But it should be fine because it's all static binaries, right?
You would think so. That's the promise. I was thinking that. Other folks on the team are thinking that. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. I said I was not right. Ooh, I was no chance I was giving you I told you so. They were like, oh, well, shouldn't this work? I said, oh man, it should work, but
let's LDD that thing and see.
I still think maybe 50-50. And so then we got the bits. And we run the bits on this old machine, and naturally, it shits the bed. Well, not naturally. As a surprise to everyone, and only like I said, I didn't guess it 100%. I was like, it's probably gonna work, but it might not.
Yeah.
Like maybe I was saying 25% chance of fail. So then it didn't run, and they're like, oh no, what are you gonna do about it? And I was like, oh well, I know that. Unfortunately, I'm the one who's stuck on this thing. And then, when you run the thing, it was saying like, cannot find glibc 2.34, 2.14 as it's looking for one.
Let's do some syn linking.
Well, no, those things are all in there, right? It's just that these are old glibs on that box. So it can't find that, and glib's got, I'm running old ass static binaries from 1,000 years ago on modern stuff, and the glib is like, oh, you wanted to have glib profile 1.4, not literally that, but some old shit, no problem.
As long as it's
I'm building here, we're building on a new one with a new glib and then trying to run on an old one with an old glib. That's not going to fly. So the fix ended up being Go's packaging is pretty easy to install Go, not system wide. Just install Go in my home user or this dedicated user's directory. Get those bits, recompile the thing. Go compiles very quickly. Now we've got this stuff, and now we've got the stuff that can run on whatever Debian 10 was. Buster, I think it was called Buster. So now it's running on Buster, and everybody's happy. And we got this goofy little tool doing what we want. Hooray! And Go does this interesting stuff, like it's sort of Go mod and Go sum, like you're locking in yourself to specific, very, very specific versions of packages and things like this.
So I end up working with all of it because you can't deploy it if you can't build it. So you got to figure out how to build it.
That's right.
You got to figure out how to run it, which means you got to support all of the packaging, the dependent packaging around it, right? That might be, do I install a user level Go instead of a system level Go? Do I use, PyVer to manage different versions of Python and, dynamically build virtual environments, or what do I do? And so while I don't write the code, I have to know how it works,
right,
to be able to build it and run it and ship it, right? And that also means, because I'm usually that last step in the chain, when it stops working, when it works on local but it doesn't compile for us to get to production, got to figure out why it doesn't work. So I got to debug the code, right? And then go back and figure that out. And while, yes, we can try to shove that back and, push it toward the development team and say, hey, but we're not a wall, right? We should be working on this together. And so that means that everybody involved in it needs to own that responsibility.
Right.
It's not just devs and DevOps or SRE or it's really about all of that being a shared pool of resources. I'm not going to solve all of it, but I can solve some of it, right? When we're chasing a memory leak in a C++ application, right? And we did this all the time, and we built Valgrind into the entire deployment system for the build and deployment system for our development environments, so that we could, as developers are changing our C++ stacks, it would use Valgrind, generate the reports, report those back, push those things back to the development team to say, hey, that new change you made just introduced a detectable memory leak, right?
Yeah, okay.
And so understanding the Valgrind reports, understanding why and how, not my area. It's figuring out how to build that tooling into our tool chain. That was my area. So I end up doing all of it. I just don't write code all day.
Dig it. Are you the one on the team? Are you the one on the side that says, let's vendor lock all of the stuff?
I like to when I can. I mean, it's complicated. It's a complicated decision.
It is a complicated decision.
It was pretty common in the Ruby world, right? Because there's built-in tooling within it to do that, right? And you just checks in, and there's a whole vendor tree. In the PHP and C++ world and Unity world, that was a lot of sort it out yourself. But because at EA in our video games, one of the mandates that we had for all the code that we shipped was that we be able to reproduce this 20 years later.
Okay.
So
good luck.
There's an entire archival team. We ship boxes of hardware that later turned into VMs of fake hardware. But on that machine is every single dependency required to rebuild this thing.
I love it. I mean,
vendoring was first.
I love it.
Yeah. So vendoring was first class. We had to do that, right?
And you don't get, if you start off with vendoring as a first class participant in your organization, I feel like, and I haven't dealt with it on such a large scale, but I feel like you also mitigate a whole lot of the supply chain attacks. I have in our notes here to talk about the left pad scenario. Are you familiar with that one?
That was an NPM one. I'm not familiar with that specific one, but there have been many.
There's been loads of attack vectors through NPM.
Yep.
That have happened, but NPM is the hotness today. JavaScript is the hotness today. I am imagining a universe where the other tooling that somebody was just recently trying to shove some fairly complicated backdoor through. Oh, it was on HN. It was it wasn't in SSH, but it was in some other compression utility. And there was some opaque weird shit in the code. And it was somehow it made it through this and made it through this and made it through this. But you're only vulnerable if you had this piece loaded and if you had this loaded and if you had this loaded. A lesson I think I learned in 2005 when I was just learning about Gentoo. Maybe it was a little bit later than that. But I used it like everybody. I used Apache web server in 2004, 2005 on various copies of Slackware or Gentoo. And I was running the fresh bits. And then all of a sudden there was some vulnerability in Apache, not in the core of Apache, in a module on Apache, mod LDAP. And then, at this particular juncture, someone was scanning our system. A vendor that we paid money was scanning our system and said, oh, no, you have a vulnerable Apache because you have such and such. And I said, no, well, we don't have that. And he goes, oh, well, it's part of the install. I said, well, it's not part of our install because at the moment I'm running Slackware, which had outdated Apache. So I fetch their freshest bits, and then I run this little script to build the whole thing. And you can get a lot of options at that point in time, including don't build me any LDAP stuff. Don't build
the
me
things I don't need because
I need this. Right. Exactly. So even if you had that built and that shared library for mod LDAP, you still had to have it like loaded on your system for the vulnerability to occur. But there's something in your supply chain on a very well trusted piece of software that if you're not taking pains to lock down out of the box, you would end up with like a vulnerable system. So archival, being first class, puts vendoring of your tooling into first class, which sort of seems like it lends itself nicely towards the, oh, well, we're also going to take a couple of steps to, pare back from our dependencies the crap that we don't need. Or at least that's the thing that I was thinking way back then. And I am not very smart. So I'm sure that everyone else is already like doing this.
I mean, mostly all we hear about these days is just pinning, right? So which is better than nothing, where we say this is the specific version that we need. And it, so we need 1.1.1. If 1.1.2 comes out, we're not going to change to it. That has to be a chosen, selected thing, right? But you might also say, well, we really trust this team. The problem here is that, do you? Because, and say, well, 1.1x, anything is fine because we know they're not going to change interfaces. Well, just because they don't change
That's
interfaces,
true. I mean, they're not
mean they don't change upstream libraries.
Right. They're in a lot of stuff I'm doing on a daily basis, there's Python and there's PHP and there's JavaScript. Lots of that stuff, drives the web. And like out of the box, if you npm add something, it puts it into, the package file, but it puts it in there as like version 4.20, caret symbol 4.20. So you'll get any 4.20. Whatever, which I annoy the crap out of everybody I'm working with by saying, no, don't put caret symbol 4.20. Like, let's explicitly lock this to 4.20.69. And like, that's it. And that's what we're going to use. And well, what if a new version comes out? Yeah, what if a new version comes out? Pay attention to it. Know that that's going to happen. But those guys who did the left pad fiasco, and I don't think it was just left pad, but it was a couple of other things, and it was a fiasco for multiple reasons. One is the core functionality of left pad was like one line of JavaScript, and it's a fairly simple construct, right? Pad my string with the given character on the left side of my string until it's the appropriate length that I've been given, and you can do it like string.blah. You just write one line of code that is not one single function call with a return, but is, using 3 of the string primitives. Ooh, right? You got a string repeat and you got to do this other thing and this other thing. Like, oh, wow. But the folks who were making LeftPad got like mad at the universe for whatever reason and decided to just like nuke their repo. They didn't, and what's awesome is they didn't change the interface. But now instead of doing like a LeftPad, it did a no-op and returned null or undefined or whatever the shit is called in JS, right? So it gave you back garbage. And now everybody's like, oh, well, let me just start my workday today with an NPM update. Why is everything broken? And whoever had put that up there, you know, also was teaching the NPM universe like a sort of valuable lesson and like nuked all the other stuff.
Right.
So it's like, oh, well, let me just go back one version on my left pad. Sorry, you can't do that. And I don't know. I mean, I'm looking at at the scenarios I've got set up, and I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I was like specifically locked to one version on that scenario because, well, one is I don't start my workday doing an NPM update. We've got a specific thing that says, oh, this package that we pay attention to at a top level has told us something. We know what our downstream dependencies are, right? Because all of these, you know, the package file or the composer file that are building these things, you know, they're giving me that whole dependency tree. So you can then go and look at every single package in the dependency tree to see who's been modified or who's changed, or if there's been some update to some of your underlying package that necessitates you doing something. And a lot of times there's changes, but they're like, oh, bug fix this, bug fix this, bug fix this, improve documentation, reformat this, refactor this. Stuff that, you know, stuff that matters, but doesn't matter.
Right.
You know, not to us. We're not hitting that bug right now. We don't need that thing. And we definitely don't need the upgrade. We need the update if there's a security problem, 100%. You fixed an edge case that we've never run into and don't feel like we're ever going to run into, we'll put your thing in our update queue. And when our update vendor dependency queue gets big enough, then we pull the stuff in. This is like ridiculously hard, I feel like, in today's universe with Docker.
Yes.
Because now the thing I'm pulling in is not a left pad package that is 4 lines of JavaScript and a whole bunch of other ceremony that makes the download a megabyte for 4 lines of JavaScript, whatever. You know, it's fun to bag on the deployment size of node modules these days. And
thousands of lines of YAML and JSON just to do 4 lines of Java.
4 lines of code, and you know, I'll have a rant about that. I'm down with don't repeat yourself, man, but sometimes you got to repeat yourself, or you have to repeat somebody else in your controlled environment. You know, like
it's okay to just take the piece of code that you need. You don't have to take the library.
Right, especially if it's something that is ever so simple. You know, complicated stuff, I can see that. But
Docker containers are a huge monstrosity. It's everything.
And you know what's aggravating as heck is okay, so the note I had to start on this meeting was recrepo. That's, you know, some Latin word which means like archive or storehouse, something like that. I can't remember exactly what it means. Doesn't matter exactly right now. But I had set that up for some projects that I work on myself. And I'd really solely set it up just for myself. And what was fairly easy to do, the way it works is that recrepo is basically just like a proxy. And so when I need to get something for my Perl universe, let me see if I can find it. Oh, I have something. There you are.
Why am I'm having daymares right now about CPAN.
Yeah, I use CPAN. So that was the first thing I actually set up with this, because I had old code from ages ago that did something very, very similar, and I had old Perl code that is awesome because it still works. But you know, definitely Perl is write once, read 0 times. But CPAN, those guys did great things. CPAN is great. CPAN is a reference for all the other folks that are trying to do this stuff because they made so many choices there and also stubbed their toe on everything else. Shit that NPM is stubbing their toe on in 2022. The CPAN guys stubbed their toes on that in 2009, let's say, but probably before there. I'm just looking at a blog post where someone was talking about a specific thing here. Anyhow, you set up a CPAN mirror. It's very, very easy. The Recrepo thing that I have in my universe is this proxy. So when you set it as your CPAN mirror, it's empty. But you hit this endpoint, and it knows that it's either locked or unlocked at the moment. And if it's unlocked, it'll take your request, forward it up to the proper global CPAN or whatever you have configured, pull down the stuff and do the regular stuff. And now I've got my cached copy, for lack of a better term, right now locally. And then I can go into my Recrepo config and I can say, you're locked now. And so all of my other Perl distros, if I just say, oh, Perl, CPAN, install, lib www, it's going to go and hit my mirror and get whatever version my mirror thinks is the latest, because my mirror is now in locked mode.
Right.
Oh, we need to do our update ceremony. That's very excellent. Put the lights down, draw the little circle and star on the floor, set up my candles, begin the sacred incantations, unlock my mirror so that it can update, then run the normal client commands. And it'll fetch the stuff, and then the mirror will go upstream and it'll find the stuff. And I keep the old stuff. I don't delete. Deleting is for chumps. I just buy another hard drive. And pull the latest bits down. And then I relock the stuff. And now everybody else in my CPAN universe using my CPAN gets the fresh hotness.
Yep. That
was fairly easy to do for CPAN. You're just like, oh, set my config to my mirror to be this one.
It's not too hard for Ruby and Python. I haven't done it for
off the top of my head.
But we've done it for Debian packages and Yum packages.
So you're doing mirrors also for a whole distro. Interesting. I don't know if I have any of that in my notes here.
When it comes to reproducibility, especially like in the Red Hat universe, they were changing things all the time. And I mean, one of my biggest worst example was when they changed something in a library for GCC, and it caused GCC to stop building our software in debug mode. Only if I needed debug objects in it, right? I mean,
yeah, you don't need that shit,
right? We're not developing 800,000 lines of C++ that we actually have to debug. No, and so it stopped working. And Red Hat's like, well, if you give us the code, we'll spend some time figuring it out. And we're like, well, legal says we can't give you the code, so thanks. I had to fork GCC. And forking GCC means make world for everything in, right? Every RPM has to be rebuilt virtually because of that. Because now we have to, they all depend back on glibc, which depends on GCC, and there's all this complex dependency. Fortunately for us, because we already had frozen repos, all we had to do was say, okay, great, we're just going to we'll just take a fresh snapshot, roll that one package back to the previous one. It took 3 months to figure out what package it was that was broken, of continually recompiling and recompiling, and then make world, set up the tooling, because we weren't previously building that many RPMs.
Right.
Build world just for the just x86 64. We didn't have to worry about 32-bit. We didn't have to worry about lots of things. We had to narrow use case. But then we were already forking the repos, so that part of the work was done. It was just implementing the rest of the tool chain. But yeah, I mean, we've done, I think for Python and Ruby, it was fairly straightforward to use a proxy that you can define your upstream and say, this is my proxy point. And then what that proxy does, whether it passes through or whether it rejects if it doesn't have it, is really just like a choice of what your proxy is doing. And there's
who's there a proxy that already does this?
Yeah, there are, and I don't have any of them off the top of my head. It's been too long. But
I have been very motivated on the internet searching for this, and I have found one-offs for a specific thing. That is, I found ones, here's how to do your Ruby gems, but local.
Right.
Pretty dang close, but not exactly what I want. And
we ended up hand rolling all of it. I don't recall because it was depending on which team and which company at the time, how much of that it was existing resources.
Every time I've had to do this, I have had to pretty much hand roll something that really just turned out to be a couple of shell scripts. Like, oh, I'll run the npm thing to do an install, and I'll watch to see what it tries to do over here. Cool. Now let me just replicate a bunch of that with curl, run those commands over here, and make a similar directory structure on this other boxin. You're done. Like, you don't have to do too much else. I mean, you could if you wanted to, but you don't. You just do that, and you're in great shape. But I have not found one. In my mind, supply chain issues are bigger than people think. And they don't think about it mostly because it largely just works. Very, very true. Until it doesn't. And then until it doesn't is a disaster that costs you a shed load of money that you could have, that you should have, that it was not unreasonable to think, oh, well, why didn't you guys put 10% of that money you just lost towards not shitting the bed?
Right.
Which is,
no one does risk analysis and
I don't know these guys.
Impact. They never look at possible impacts. They don't step back, make that business decision, and say, "Look, we did the thing, and our expected risk on this is 10% of revenue, and we project that to fund a team to manage this regularly is going to cost more than that. So we'll say this is the cheaper route." No one does that.
I don't know if it's no one, but you could get me to agree that it's very few.
Very few.
I help loads of people get their company going from zero. Like, I'm good from 0 to 1,000, right? If your company is worth nothing, I can help you get to like a $10 million valuation. Once you're past that, you need a different CTO, and you need somebody who's doing different, larger team management stuff that I'm not interested in, never really have been interested in, and therefore am now at this many years old, not good at, because my practice on that stuff is very low.
Sure.
So, and I tell folks that right earlier in the game, they're like, oh, I don't know if I should do this. I'm like, find an attorney who you like and give them some money.
Right.
Find an accountant who you like and give them some money. Go out and buy some insurance. Get the basics. Get some E&O. Get this. And folks are like, oh, well, do I need that? Do you need that like it's bread and water? No. But do you need that because of a 1% probability situation occurring for you, and then that 1% probability situation costing you more than you spent on your insurance for the last 5 years? Absolutely. My own small business insurance, I cannot remember what it is because the number is so insignificant to the business.
$700 a year for me right now.
So basically, I mean, not nothing, but if it's a business problem that you can actually identify and it's less than $1,000, that's zero. I mean, not to be too flippant, and with it's easier to spend other people's money. So your $1,000, that's totally different than my $1,000, of course, right? But pretty much nothing. And the kinds of things that you would use it for are, oh, well, I have a $50,000 problem. So you would be buying this insurance for 50 years before you're like really upside down on it. And then like if you bought the insurance for I've been buying insurance for Adocio for 20 years. And I don't even have an office, but the policy still comes with the thing in case somebody shows up at my office and does a slip and fall.
Yep.
You know, well, what do you need that for? If you have an office, you need that. If you don't have an office,
good luck.
You should also still just have that because it's covering other dumb shit. Like, well, what if your client's in your car while you're driving around? Or this is my home office. What if they fall up or down my steps?
Right.
Or something. You know, they got to walk through my garage to get here. My garage right now is like a death trap.
Yep.
Why aren't people putting insurance on it?
I mean,
software supply chain is your insurance. Why don't you spend when you had the left pad disaster, bro? Your small company, your medium-sized company, your whatever-sized company had n number of developers spinning their wheels for a day or two. Recovery, and you've got opportunity cost, right? Oh, now they're dealing with putting out that fire, so they're not putting on any features or bug fixes or maintenance on the other stuff. Okay, now you're behind schedule because this weird crap came up. Never minding the fact that your software devs for that 8-hour day that they were there doing that work, did you just like lose $1,000? No, of course not. It was more than that. You know, so why didn't your smart business spend $3,000 a year on a software supply chain, prevent it from shitting the bed? In your very, very obscure case, we had to break away from our vendor and then make a fork of something and then use that for our universe. That's a super, super, super big lift. I feel like that's not a thing that happens to a lot of folks. But then you basically, after doing that, are now running your own Red Hat package mirror.
Right.
That's all stuff that's built with your thing and uploaded to your mirror. And then you just, what were they saying at the time? Was it RPM or?
Yeah, that was all RPM.
Yeah, you do RPM search, whatever, or Yum, or whatever it is.
Yep.
And, you know, run your own setup. You know, I think Gentoo made it super easy to run your own mirror for their package thing right out of the box. Just takes a lot of storage. Same story with Debian. If you're going to get the complete thing, if you're only going to get the packages that you need, these things are significantly smaller.
Oh yeah.
You know, like I run my CPAN mirror is not 18 terabytes of stuff.
When we were building AMIs, we built them from scratch, right? So we installed every package from our repos to when we stood up
from scratch.
No, I mean, yeah.
What do you mean? What does your from scratch mean?
It's basically
like you make an empty file system.
Yep, you make an empty file.
Some random kernel, and you boot up off of your USB that has the good.
I mean, this is happening in AMI. So
into the thingamajig.
We did the first part of it once. We would
Right.
update the kernel through Amazon's kernel update interface.
Right.
And then we start installing packages. You build the process once. You never have to change it, right?
No, it goes into maintenance mode. So all of your changes are now 30 minutes.
We need to update our OS, or because we would build our base AMI, everything would rebuild off of that base AMI. So then we would install Puppet, and we would install all of our next pieces that manage the rest of our supply chain. But the base AMI, when we needed to rebuild it, was coming from scratch. And fortunately, I had a great guy in another part of the company because, you know, great thing about EA and working as a small team in a large organization is you have many other resources you can call on. Someone had already did the lift and built 90% of it. So I just took his tool, cleaned it up,
copy that,
automated it for our thing, right? And because they needed it for something else. So when we were building our own pieces, we could just stack on top of that.
Before I was writing code for most of my job, I started in this whole game in the QA side, and I was on a test team at Microsoft for the clustering company they just bought, and had to manage this lab of a couple hundred computers, blah, blah, blah. So I wrote this and VB6 was the hotness at the time, okay? Keep in mind, when I'm talking about how long ago this was, Windows NT4 was in production in everywhere. Windows 2000 was the product they were getting ready to launch.
Yep.
That was, so I was there for Service Pack 6, Service Pack 6A, because Service Pack 6, oops, and then for Windows 2000, and I left before SP1 came out. But I wrote some stupid little tool in VB6 to work on all of our lab machines, and it was a very dumb thing. Starts up on VB6, makes a connection to this other database that existed on our lab network to see what this machine was supposed to do, which comes from the machine name that gets set on the automated install, and then would do silly things, manipulate the registry or blah blah blah, but also very importantly, change the desktop background color. Or if Ed needed to use that machine, then the background of the desktop was a picture of Ed, because he had reserved that machine and had this crappy little web UI to the database. Oh, I need these machines, and I want to reserve these machines in the lab because I need them for testing the blah blah blah. And now, the way that it was working is you'd have a bunch of machines connected up to KVM switches that controlled 16 machines. There was lots of opportunity for you to accidentally hit the wrong button on the wrong KVM and not know which machine you're on, and then make a mistake that interrupts somebody else's workflow. Now they're like, oh, fudge, I got to start all over again. No, that's not awesome. So it was basically manipulating the desktop from this goofy little UI, and whenever you were done with it, it had a little thing in the system tray, and you could click it and you could go, oh, I'm done. And it would just, we're all signing into the same machines with the same user. There's no domain or any of this other fun stuff happening, because these are deploys we're doing 3 or 4 times a day. It would just know that somebody clicked it and somebody did this and somebody did this. It had a little prompt that was type in a little changelog note. When I said a text box, you could type in less than a tweet, right? I'm done with this machine /Ed. Okay, cool. I'm reserved for, Carol's bringing in a test /DJB. And then the box, my background turns yellow. My little note is there. The machine name gets drawn on the background real big, generated some bitmap to draw there. Easy peasy stuff. And then folks are like, oh, that's really cool. Can we use that in our lab? I was like, I guess so. I don't know. Meanwhile, my manager's like, careful getting started writing software, because once you start writing software, it's going to become like your baby, and it's going to be hard to let go of that. And, you're supposed to be in here staying focused on running my test team, and it's like, oh, yeah, I forgot, because it turns out I rather enjoy writing software. But yeah, there was somebody else that had the tool, and I ran into problems on stuff when I was working on it. And there's a nice internal mailing list, and you say the thing, and now you're ready to rock and roll. And somebody comes around and they're like, oh, I'm over in such and such a building. Come over and talk to me. Oh, is it, and it turns out calling the Win32 APIs from some weird way through VB6 was as long as you know this neat trick in VB6 that's not documented, no problemo. Oh, okay. Well, guess what? On campus, somebody knew that, so we were able to fix it. I was able to get my little bug fixed, and the real bug was updating some documentation that somebody else touched on MDM a little bit later. And I was like, great. All I had to do was like have a 10-minute conversation with somebody on the registry team and everything works. Yeah, I missed that. But I can't vendor my Docker.
Right.
Docker is built out of the box. When you say Docker pull, like it's going to Docker IO. And there's not in the Go universe, I export a variable. I export Go proxy, I'm done. In the Perl universe, I update my global CPAN config, which I think is my favorite way to handle that one. In my PHP universe, I run Composer and I tell it to use this new repo URL. In NPM, I do the same thing. Ruby, I don't have my own project for this. I don't have any notes on what I had to do for Ruby, but I know you can set your own gem server.
Yeah.
I don't remember the rest of it. For most of these things like Gentoo or Debian or your repo mirrors, you can go and look in your apt sources and just be like, oh, guess what? I'll change the name of apt sources to like debian.mirrors.lino.com. Yep. And I'm done. That part's easy peasy lemon squeezy. But I was whining about the Docker one.
I mean, the closest you could do is host your own from scratch and then run all your Dockers and build everything off of scratch.
Well, you can also say like Docker pull. Like that's what those guys at what's it called? I was just hyping them up a second ago here, dude. Come on.
There is
Linux server.io. And you can look at a lot of these folks who are doing this. Where's the images? And then it tells you like, let me get this. Boink. Boink is still around. I love it. So you can go and get Boink, and it's basically just like you say clone, and I'm trying to find, and you go to lscr.io. So your image name has to include the first part, which is your, I guess that would be your proxy at that point. Is that how it ends up working?
I think there are some proxy sorts that can do something like that, transparent, pseudo-transparent. So you update your from path to include that, but there's not any. I don't think there's anything that would like change it. So if you said, image scratch, that it would just go through your proxy. I don't think there's like a global configuration environment variable, anything of that nature that says always look here no matter where it's supposed to be from. You have to go change your Docker files, which means if you pull in someone else's Docker file that has a upstream, then has
an upstream from over there. Now I've broken out of my secured supply chain. Right. I mean, that's my objective, is to have the secured supply chain. Like, well, maybe you shouldn't be using stranger Docker images. You're right.
The dirty way you do this is that you distribute that cache. You use Docker layer caching, and you point your Docker layer cache to a remote cache, and you pre-populate that cache.
Well, how do I make a Docker layer cache? What the hell is that?
The DLC environment ecosystem is pretty painful to deal with, but the DLC Docker layer caching, there is the idea of a remote Docker layer cache, and there's a couple of different ways to implement it and approach it. I don't have any of them in front of me. I don't have them off the top of my head, but that is probably your least painful way. But basically, to do a vendoring model, you would have to have something pre-populate. Say, I need all of these things, and I pre-populate them. I guess you could.
Why would you need to pre-populate them?
Because you're wanting specific versions, right?
Right.
So Circle CI,
caching
GitHub, and GitHub Actions both do some fairly complex Docker layer caching stuff behind the scenes. They take different approaches at it, but those are two. If one wanted to dig into it, those are places that you can look into what they talk about, how you use theirs. That might help you figure out how they implement. And a lot of GitHub stuff is because it's all was Azure DevOps. There's ways to get to its code.
But this is looking like it's doing Docker images using. This is from Circle CI. Docker layer caching, but that's going to be caching stuff that my test did. That's not going to be.
It's the layers of your Docker build.
Somebody else's.
It's the layers of your Docker build, right? Which means that your first layer is your from.
Right.
Your next layer is your next run step. Your next
I'm
layer.
Still getting Debian latest from.
So it's going to cache
outside of my very special.
It's going to cache that copy, that image of that layer. Now, making those shared and universal.
This is only useful when creating your own Docker image with build.
Right. Because it happens at Docker build time, right? That's when you. There are some other tricks that you can do, but it's all very fuzzy. It was only 2 years ago, and it's very fuzzy.
DLC caches your image layers within the container VM that is used to run your job.
Yeah, there's a remote and a local version of it. And I could be conflating different platforms variations on it.
Well, that is interesting. I didn't know about that, so I'm going to put that onto my whole list because, like, if you search for Docker cache, it's just like
most of the time when we start looking and using this, we're looking at performance enhancement, right? How quickly does it take to build? We don't want to have to rebuild all these layers every time. We have multiple machines that can talk to a shared layer cache. Similarly, like when you can push all your layers up to, like if you're using ECR, you can push all the layers that you built of that container up instead of just the final layer.
Yeah,
like that's really pull all the layers and then use those caches. So there's caching mechanisms there, but that's all more about performance than vendoring. I think there's ways to stack some of that together, some of the various techniques to get something like a dynamic cache to give you not exactly a vendor, but something like it. Like when we fork or freeze a Yum repository or a Debian repository, right? It's not exactly a vendor. We just hold a copy of it out we still use it as a thing. Properly, if we're vendoring, we're taking the library and we're dropping it in our code, right? So it's a part of our code base. We now have a copy of that library. But in my opinion, that's proper vendoring. Everything else is some sort of caching layer, right? But the idea of controlling your supply chain is the thing. I'm sure there's tools probably for it now because supply chain attacks are a thing that are talked about a lot. I just haven't looked at them for Docker. I've mostly dealt with it we're trying to do something kind of like it to make these really big builds. If we're building a 15 gig image and we don't need to move it around as much.
This one, I'm reading a little more on the Docker, and they would call it like you have to use your own registry. And to make that go, Docker looks for a dot separator or a port separator in the image. So if I say Docker pull metabase, it's going to use its default, and it's going to use the default that is compiled into the Docker binary.
Yes.
Know that because when I was doing some of this research, like I found the line of code and it's like, this is why it does this trick. I have a note to myself that is maybe you can trick it by setting a proxy environment variable. And then that proxy environment variable would then know magic stuff. But I haven't dug into that too much.
A lot of the dirty ways here are always using a freaking SOX proxy because almost everything has some sort of SOX proxy
built in. Exactly.
Because to work inside big enterprise to reach the internet, Sometimes you have to use a SOX proxy, so everything ended up building support for it. So that's your hack.
Yeah,
your hack on top of your hack on top of your hack. It's not like a supported feature. You're just plugging a transparent thing in between and hoping and making it work.
well then, this one is you make your own registry, and this person's trick is I Docker pull Metabase or whatever it is you're looking at. I was just messing with Docker Metabase before this, so that's fresh in my head. And then you say, okay, cool. Maybe you adjust any tags on it, and then you say Docker push my local registry name, recrepo.idotio.com/image name.
Right.
And then I'm ready to go with the right tag, tag it as latest, tag it as 13.4, tag it as blessed.
Or match their tags or whatever it is that you need to do. Yeah.
So I'm thinking if I'm using a shithack proxy, not SOX or something like this, I could, for vendoring this, I could just say, do Docker pull my supply chain proxy server name / regular old namespace and image off of the main universe Metabase, and then the local Docker binary would then hit my supply chain magic box.
Right.
And then it would say, oh, I don't have this one locally. Let me go upstream and get one.
Yep.
Again, depending on the unlock state of the supply chain image, supply chain resource proxy.
If you don't mind changing your path, it's fair. Your image source path in all of the places, it's fairly reliable to go that route. One of the projects I worked on, I guess last year, they did just some really lightweight, right? Vendoring where they had a CI project that contained all of the Docker files that they wanted to, a Docker file that frommed all of the things that, a different one for every single thing. So if they needed MySQL, version 8 point whatever, that Docker container, then there was a Docker file for MySQL and a build process that would pull that Docker, that would from that with that version and build a new container that is a copy of it. It's just a copy of it. And, a Docker file with just a from makes a copy and then pushes it to their own registry. And that's what they use for all their own things. Primarily, it wasn't about supply chain. It was more about API limits on.
There's lots of reasons to run your own mirror. The old, we'll go back to the old school term for whether this is a proxy or this or this or this or a cache or something.
Right.
There's loads of reasons to run your own mirror. Linode, Vulture, Dio, they're all running their local mirrors. They've got mirrors in their data center.
Yep.
And they're kept up to date with the hotness for the distros that they support, right? So they've got their BSD and their Debian and their Fedora and their Ubuntu and their Arch images and those mirrors like in that data center. So when I'm like, ooh, apt update, it's not even going onto the internet. Right. It is the internet, but it's not the internet. Yeah. It doesn't leave this building.
Yeah.
And
they're not having to pay for extra bandwidth for it.
It's not it's for bandwidth. But it's also because these guys this is a polite thing to do rather than hammering the Debian global pool, which is totally fine for me to do from like my laptop or something. But not, I don't know. Can you imagine like thousands of nodes inside of one of these data centers all trying to do an update at a time? How come nobody can visit my website? Oh, a bunch of other people in this data center are fetching the exact same bits from some Debian pool server, or Arch or whatever. Like, give me a break.
Yep.
That would not awesome. That would be not awesome.
It's interesting to me that we haven't seen widespread support for the mirroring pattern that we have with repos, with the package.
Debian, Ubuntu,
Right.
Gentoo, BSD. Those
BSD,
things are
everybody.
all so easy for you. Like,
It's always been.
hey, here's how to do this with like one line of code change. Go to this spot and change a config in this file.
It's been a native feature
And it was
since
super
the
easy.
second package repository tool was released, basically. And we don't see that very much in like the NPMs and even the Ruby gems and the Python. Like Python, we've seen some divergence, and maybe in NPM we've seen some divergence. But for like true mirror the universe, I think they want to control it, for better or worse. They want to control it instead of allowing you to have mirrors and copies of it.
Why would you do that?
And then they complain that they get overloaded and they need more money, or they need to API limit you, or I'm looking at you, Docker.
Is that what they did?
Well,
yeah, right. I gotta remember that now, because the OpenTHC side of my universe, we publish stuff on Docker. I mean, we're not very attractive. Not a lot of people are using. There's
you have a niche market. I mean,
very niche market, right? So whatever. But I was a little nervous, like, oh no, we're gonna get blocked on our poll count, anonymous poll count, right? Because loads of the folks that are even kicking the tires are trying it this way, are, I would say, a step past hobbyist computer users, but not on the day job professionals. And so they may not sit down and like register an account with this and blah, blah, blah. They just want to sit at their desktop and say, oh, Docker pull.
The instructions just say Docker pull, not go authenticate to a Docker.
It's like clone this repo and say Docker compose up.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, I didn't know that there was going to be a third step. F all that. Fortunately, that's not like their limits where I'm sitting. Their limits are very generous. But I've got a friend who makes something that's more popular, make tools for developers, and then they want to clone that image. And those guys are getting that image 2 and 3 times, a day on different machines, or they're running it on this CI with no caching, or they're running it over here with some no caching, or all kinds of different things happen. Yeah, I think my next experiment is to see about intercepting Docker using a proxy. But it may as well just be easy enough to say, like, I guess what happens if I say I want to fetch a Docker image from my magic proxy / metabase, and then that pulls something, but then the other images that it references, are those going to be like on hub.docker.io?
Well, that's an interesting thing.
Or is it going to actually then say, oh, your image name, the metabase depends on, I don't know, some other lower level image, right?
Right.
Is that going to then use that same host name that I've
set?
Well,
at least with Docker,
somewhere else.
That's an interesting component, because Docker doesn't. You only pull the image associated with that from. You don't pull anything upstream. That is a compiled copy of its own upstream, right?
Well, it's getting 6 layers.
It's only going to pull the final layer, the final compiled layer. Mostly the registries don't contain all the build layers. They don't contain all the build layers. They only, because the registries don't want to pay for that storage, right? Now you can choose to pay for that storage and ship layers, which is why we usually do that down at the application containers that we're building.
No, but, hold on. Look, I'm going to share my screen here real quick, right? If I go into this thing, and I don't have metabase on here, but I'll say Docker pull metabase. Wonder if it was running or not. Pull access denied. Repository does not. Or may require Docker login. Boy, I don't know what happened on this machine. So let's just go to this other machine. Oh man, I got a whole bunch of stuff already installed here.
Oh, it's Metabase/Metabase.
Do you think I'm just being too stupid? I don't think that's what I did before. My problem was I was being too stupid. Okay, cool. But you see, look, it's fetching this and then it's grabbing these other things. What are all these other
true. Yeah, you're right. I'm not sure. I mean, they are some sort of layers. I'm not sure if they're layers or if they're just parts. I don't know if they're like actual build layers.
Me neither. Do I still have dive on this machine? I do have dive. You ever use this thing?
But either way, though, it's not going to pull. It's not even if those are layers of the build, right? So if it had 7 different commands in it and there were 7 different layers, then it's still that first layer is not going to. It's not a reference. It's not like a symlink back to another image. It's still the layer from that one container. If you ever go and like, I've spent a lot of time debugging what you store inside like ECR, and
Right.
it's not. They are just copies. So it's not going to have like references back to, okay, they end up starting with an Ubuntu image somewhere and they work their way down from it after a couple of frums. Or a couple of different Docker files that have frums. That it's just going to be that final output would be its first piece.
So I did fetch this one, docker.io/blah, blah, blah. And then have you ever used dive?
No.
Oh man. So this super genius, W.A. Goodman, Alex, it looks like. I wonder what the W is for. Anyways.
I've probably wanted to use this tool and done it the hard way before.
You know what? I know that there is a hard way. F it. So it dumps this little text user interface. And here's where the layers of my thing come from. Blobs. And then here's some shell command. And then here's another shell command and another shell. Doing something with entry point. CA cert entry point. Does something with like, it looks like a git, blah, blah, blah. And then copy metabase jar into this thing. And you're ready to rock and roll. And you can see like, it's giving me the layer details about what's going on.
So you are getting all of the layers.
Here's all of the details from that layer. Here's the something. And then this layer contents over here too is just like, you know, I don't know.
But it's upstream
at the bottom, but it's telling you all this like cool stuff. And there it is. Control A, I think, is showing you your aggregated changes. As you like go and, you know, yeah, this was the thing I was trying to do. Collapse all these directories. I don't know how to collapse them all at the same time. But then if you're looking over here and you can see like what's happening on each of my layers, and it's showing you, oh,
right,
we started off with this very small layer with what's in from blobs. I've never even heard of blobs.
Well, so that's going to be just one layer though, right? If you were to pull blobs, if you were to Docker pull blobs, then you're probably going to find that it has multiple layers because it was built of multiple pieces. But you're only seeing it for Metabase. You're only seeing that one layer.
Would it just be called blobs?
I don't know. I mean, that's what it was in the thing. So
just said blobs.
But that's also relative to what they built from. Right? Wherever their build environment was, whatever their upstream Docker repository is, that's what the image is called. You may not have access to it. It may not be on Docker.io. It could be inside their own thing.
Yeah, I mean, here's a bunch of different people that have these different projects that are called blobs. 270 different projects that are called blobs.
It may try like Metabase /blobs, but I don't know if they publish it or not.
I don't think I'm gonna do that. Well, who is the one that makes the one that's called Scratch?
I forget who does Scratch. I don't know who's publishing it.
From Scratch.
Yeah, that one.
Building base images such as Debian or BusyBox.
Is it Google publishing it? Like
as of Dr. This, from Scratch.
It's a no-op.
It is a no-op. It doesn't create an image, so previously 2-layer image will be a 1-layer image. Ooh, that's fantastic. Reserved special magic minimal image Scratch.
So it's Docker themselves that are effectively publishing it because it's just enough logic to create a file system.
Oh, look, I mean, it says Docker official image.
Yeah.
It's got their own whale icon. Whale/boat, the whale boat.
Yep.
Okay.
I don't think you can pull it, can you?
What's it gonna do?
Yeah, it's a reserved.
Cannot do that. Scratch is reserved.
You need to go back before Docker 1.5 or whatever it was, and then it's that.
I don't delete shit and I don't downgrade. Actually, I don't delete, but I do occasionally have to downgrade. Yeah, so then you use dive to figure out all these layers. So I guess my next endeavor here is to try these things from a proxy try these things with a proxy variable set, or try these things through a slightly less magic proxy.
Yeah. I want to see what my I have around. No, it's not.
Where do I have this stuff? Oh, it's on GitHub. Oh, I wonder what happens if I sign in. Oh, balls. What is my authentication code? 2-factor authentication is like my least favorite thing. Yeah. I mean, I know I need it.
And yet, but it's going to be your worst favorite thing when that day that your phone isn't working. And you can't get into anything.
Oh, I know.
Denial of service attacked by the fact that it requires a mobile device.
I freaking DDoSed myself on that anyways, basically.
Like when Authy decided that they were no longer going to support the desktop, and I'm like, hello?
Wait, did they?
Yes, they stopped supporting the desktop app.
They called me an idiot when I said, I'm going to just make my own Authy thing, because TOTP password is easy enough. Give me my magic secret.
Yep.
And then I'll know what to do. And I was happy about that. And folks were like, oh, why would you do that?
So there are very few tools that have multiple avenues. So it's basically you have a mobile device only, and that's your only authenticator. And I'm like, but what happens if my phone battery is dead and I need to log in, or I have lost my phone, or then someone else has my 2-factor and I don't.
Nope. Your host.
It's the same problem that we had with the RSA token, the physical RSA token keys. But at least then we knew, that okay, I don't have my token. That was how we got into the VPN. So, and we had to use the VPN when we were in the office and when we were at home. Exactly.
The little RSA king.
Yes.
I can't go on vacation without this thing. Otherwise, I can't get into my bank.
I couldn't go to the office without it because I couldn't get to half of the things I needed to from the office. So it was always, I kept it on my badge at the office, right? So for the office, and so wherever I go, I have my badge and I have my token. But then you leave the house without it, and you're screwed. Drive home. Go on vacation, bring it with you.
That's not my right one. I also hate this. I got multiple secrets in here, and it's like, oh, I can't even figure out which one I'm supposed to use. There we go. I gotta find this old repo. Anyway, yeah, this has been a good one. What else should we? talk about? I don't know. What's the hardest one that you had to vendor snap? All that all that stuff where you
I mean, I think the hardest stuff was any time that we were doing it for Ruby and Python and such. I never did it for Perl. Never did it. Well, with the last time I was doing major Go projects, we did was when Go said we will not have a package ecosystem. So everything you had to vendor everything. You had to manually install everything. So it wasn't vendoring it, but it was basically the same thing. And I don't know the hardest. I mean, I think the hardest was for vendoring. I swear, isn't there like a bundler command that does the vendor directly? So it checks them all directly into a tree. So I think Ruby from trying to vendor was easy. Ruby trying to mirror was hard, right? To do a caching mirror was hard.
okay.
And in Python, I don't remember the solutions that we did for either Python or Ruby, but I know that we had them in place and they're fuzzy boxes in my head. But again, for vendoring though, the hardest is freaking Java if you're using Maven. Because
Java and Maven is your least favorite.
If you were using Gradle supports file system paths for access to libraries. Mm-hmm. Maven does not. So that there are hacks that you can use to say, this is the source of my code, go use this directory. But Maven expects that you have published your package. So your library that you want to consume.
What was the other builder? Gradle or something.
Yeah, Gradle. Gradle, it was possible, but we didn't do much with Gradle. We looked at it as a solution, but it was, do we move off of Maven for projects that are already well truly built out with Maven? But so we had to do hacks in order to say, go use this tree, because we had all those things, all our dependent libraries in the repo, in the Git repo with our code, and say, go use them here. So we had to do hacks to make that work, and that was very painful because we weren't building and publishing the library, but the expectation was that it was built and published, and so Maven could pull it from its, which we could point it to our own thing, but we didn't want to build and publish them. We weren't versioning them.
Right. We just wanted to ship it.
We arguably, and what that project ended up later doing was putting all of those things off in their own, building them and publishing them so that we had a vendored copy, but we had to build and publish it, and it just infrequently changed. But we were trying to get it done quick by just checking them into the repo, and we were used to that with C++ and PHP, so it made sense. But that was the biggest pain for sure, was Maven.
Maven, my arch nemesis. No, right. I know that's not true. So then let's see, under Go.
You like XML, right?
Huh?
You love XML.
I do love XML. I remember on your resume. You I hired ages ago, man. I think the best quote that he had at like that company at the time, keeping in mind, this is now after Microsoft, the .com stuff is still sort of going. It's in the scenario where like it's dead, but people don't know it's dead yet, And we were working on this project, and it's like, oh, well, why don't we just like use XML to solve this little piece of the problem? I need to have whatever. And Dave was just like, oh yeah, dude. I mean, use the right way. XML is going to save the world. Okay. Don't understate it, I mean, and then it turns out that it actually didn't, but, in my Go projects now, I use a Go mod. And Go mod is you just say require. And then here, I think, gets really hard to vendor because I say require github.com/something/something. And so now, how would I?
You just pull that code down, drop it in a path, and point to the path, though, right? You can point to a path. I think.
Yeah, but now. Okay, yes, let's say that that's true. I can't remember off the top of my head if it is, but it stands to reason that it would be. So then my Go mod file requires something that is a path. But how do I make sure the rest of my people on my team are doing that? And then I'm on their system. So now what? I'm going to tell everybody, oh, you're working on our Teams Go project. So step one is clone our Teams project Docker.
Well, it wouldn't be when you do Go mod, really. It would be when you include the library. I don't know. I don't remember the syntax now, but when you include the library, you would just include it like it's
import.
a path. Yeah, it's an import, right? You would import it just like it's.
No, I don't think it does that.
If you imported something in your own repo, how would you import it? Do that, because you're going to take if you vendor it, you're going to take a copy of it and put it in your repo.
Yeah, I don't want to put it in my repo. I want to put
then
it in
you're not
my
really rendering it
box.
If you're going to proxy it, that's different.
Well, wait. I mean, I want my project to also be my vendor magic thing, because I want to go into my Golang code, right? And what am I looking at here? I have a fella's Julian Schmidt's HTTP router in this project, and I want to continue to use that, and I want to use that in other projects in my organization.
So you put
I don't want to have a copy of it everywhere. I want it to be in my magic.
Clone it, put it in a repo, and build it and ship it to your own package manager.
Well, there's not like a package manager. I think I still have to say.
If you're using GitHub, then there's a Go manager as a part of or package repository, right?
Yeah.
So you can build and ship Golang packages into theirs or whatever. And you just say that.
I think that's giving me a built Go thing. I don't want that. I want that source. I want the source for HTTP router version 1.
Yeah, you clone that repo, but you mirror that repo. You clone it down, and push it back up to your own copy of it. Right? You fork it. You can fork
it. And now instead of saying required GitHub Julian Schmidt HTTP router, I say required GitHub Edoshio HTTP router.
Exactly.
Okay, but I don't want to do that. I want to still say the natural thing here, require GitHub Julian Schmidt HTTP router v1.3.0, and then have my magic proxy mirror vendor thingamajig know that that's the one blessed version. Like if anybody else in the company said, hey, I want to get 1.3.5, we would say, oh, no.
There is no 1.3.5. You get an error.
View. Yeah, it'll barf with a not found or something. That's what I really want.
Right.
Anyways, I don't know if I'm going to get there, but this was a fun one about.
These are what I call frozen. That's the frozen repository model, right? The frozen mirror, frozen repository. So
I have a bunch of stuff that is C code that does that, where I need this other person's thing, and well, you just like pound include. I sure do just pound include, but and
you install those. You get those libraries from your package manager, though, right?
No, not for some of these, because they're the wrong one, or they're the wrong version, or they're the something or the something. And so for a lot of that C stuff, I basically got in my.
You just download it. You're downloading the tarballs, extracting the tarballs, and that's where they're included.
Or I took a piece of that repo and then fudged it a little bit and then stuffed it somewhere else. So if I want to work on the C project or the C++ project or whatever, what I do is I go to my thing and say, git clone the project itself. And then I say, git clone the project dependencies in this other repo that has a bunch of the other dependencies shoved into one repo. So there's just this repo that's just called like lib ass, lib this, lib blah, lib blah, lib blah, lib blah, lib blah.
Yeah. That's what we did in our C++ projects, except it was perf so everything was in one place. And we could map workspaces. So cool perf features is that like you clone a view.
Yeah.
And you can define that view. So you could take something from this path and something from this path and assemble them over here. So where we vendored stuff off, there's a tree of all our vendored libraries, but they would get mapped in your workspace mapping to where
they need to be, so I can just pound include.
Right.
Or what do they call it now? Hashtag?
Yeah.
before I was a computer nerd, I was doing stuff on a telephony game, and the octothorpe in the telephony universe is a pound.
It is pound. Yep.
And then over here they say, oh, it goes shebang. But I was reading that when I was like,
it's a hash bang. Come on, I never understood the shebang. It's a hash bang, but yes, it's pound exclamation.
Pound bang. And everyone's like, what the hell are you talking about? Pound bang. And I'm like, pound bang whack, dude. Pound bang whack Ben Bash. Do you not understand me? You know, like
I never understood the bang. I mean, I see it, but it doesn't register to me as that being a bang. It's exclamation mark. And it's a slash.
Whack. Whack and back whack. Although someone tried to tell me that slash is slash. And if you say whack, that means backslash.
There must be Windows people.
I don't know. I know other guys that say whack for forward slash and then say back whack for, you know, the escape sequence. What are we going to do?
I don't know.